All right, welcome in everybody. College Hoop News Podcast, episode number 7. I'm your host, Tony Patelis. Tonight we're going to talk Mountain West basketball. So I have a special guest host who will be joining me tonight. So I'll bring him right now. Eli Boettger from Mountain West Wire also has a really cool blog. I believe it's heatcheckcbb.com. Correct, Eli?
Yeah, you're right on both the last name and the website. So right on. Thank you.
All right, no problem. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Very good. Thanks for joining me. So a lot to talk about, so we'll get right to it. You know, Eli, before we get into the look of the league this year, I wanted to ask you a question. You know, from 2010 to 2013, you know, the Mountain West got, I think, 16 NCAA bids, and from 2014 to 2016, only 5. Why do you think that is?
You know, I think it's because of the downfall of UNLV and New Mexico, and those two teams were primed during those eras that you're talking about, when they had some of the stars there, and they had Steve Alford and Dave Rice, and those guys were doing well. And times have changed, and both of those teams have changed head coaches the last 2 years, and I think that they're probably on the upswing. It might not be this season, but maybe a year or two from now they'll be better. But without those two powerhouses, and also with Steve Fisher leaving San Diego State, it's making things difficult for the rest of the league. And I think that's why you probably see teams like Boise State and Nevada start to lurk and creep up on other teams. And that's good for those two teams. But as a whole, for the entire conference, I think they're definitely at their best when you have both New Mexico and UNLV.
Yeah, I do agree with you. You know, last year the league was really top heavy. I mean, let's not, you know, beat around the bush. I mean, Nevada and Colorado State were pretty much the class of the league, and then everybody else, it was just pretty much those two teams and everybody else. This year, though, I think the league has improved. You know, I see in my eyes 6 to 7, you know, solid teams, you know, competitive. You know, Nevada, San Diego State, Fresno, Wyoming, Boise, Colorado, UNLV. I think all those teams could be pretty good. I still think it's probably a 1, maybe 2 bid NCAA tournament league. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think max is probably 2. And for some, I don't even think that 2 might be a stretch, honestly, because I think it probably falls more on scheduling than it does talent, because I think the overall talent in this league is about as good as it's been in recent years. And you have a number of former 4-star recruits and talented transfers, and have Brandon McCoy, a 5-star transfer at UNLV. So the talent's there. And like you said, I don't expect it to be as top-heavy this year, but you have to have quality wins. And if you don't have quality wins, your team won't be selected on Selection Sunday. So I think if these teams don't have good opponents on their schedules in November and December, you won't expect many bids come March.
Yeah. You do agree, though, that the league will be better this year than last year?
I think so, yeah. It'll be more competitive. You won't see many 25-win teams or things like that. And it could come back to bite some teams, though, because you clear front runner in Nevada, and San Diego State is right there as well. But if you have other teams that are in that 6 to 7 range, maybe a Colorado State or UNLV or a Wyoming, that can knock off those types of teams, you won't have a team that can be considered the front runner throughout the season, and they won't have a quality resume and things of that nature. So overall, the league will be better, though. I do agree with that.
All right. So we're going to get into our team-by-team breakdown. So we're going to go in alphabetical order. We'll give you our takes on each team and see where they fit. So up first tonight is Air Force. You know, this is the 6th year going into the Dave Pilipovich era at the school. They've never finished higher than 6th. So I wanted to ask, are we in hot seat territory yet? Because looking at the roster, I just don't think there's much to work with. You know, they have Jacob Van back, Frank Tuohy, both averaged 10 points a game last year. Trevor Lyons is another guy that I think they're hoping, you know, to get back to where he was 2 years ago. He averaged 12 points a game. Last year, he took a dip, only averaged 7.5. You know, there's just too many question marks for me to consider this team even a middle-of-the-pack club. What's your take on the Falcons?
Yeah, I agree with you for the most part. I think that hot seat probably lean towards that territory, just because Air Force had some decent teams in mid-2000s, and they just haven't produced much of anything in the last few years. And I think that losing Hayden Graham definitely hurts. That's a 13 points per game scorer, so that one will be tough to replace. And overall, it's just tough to win at Air Force or really any of the service academies, because you're bringing in guys that don't necessarily have basketball in their future, And I mean, that's good for their individual lives, and that's great and all. But in terms of winning basketball games, that's a challenge you have to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I have them in the bottom spot in 11th. I don't see much of a difference from last year. They might even be worse, in my opinion. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. And they should be able to win some games in non-conference play, and that's solely because they're. I mean, you can take a look at the non-conference schedule, and you won't be able to recognize some of the names on there. So they'll win some games before December and January rolls around. But overall, I think this team is probably maybe a tad worse than they were last year. So I agree with number 11 for them.
Okay, yeah, that'll probably be our quickest breakdown tonight because
yeah, probably.
There's not much to talk about with Air Force. So, all right, so we're going to move on real quick. So Boise State's up next. Boise State, has really turned into one of the more consistent programs in the conference. Leon Rice done a really good job. They've won 20 games 5 years in a row. They've been to 2 NCAA tournaments. I know we have a little bit of a differing opinion on the Broncos. I think you're a little bit higher than I am. I still think they're a top 5 team per se in conference, but I really think the loss of Paris Austin was a really big blow. The kid was primed for a big year, in my opinion. He went from 4 points a game and 38% shooting 2 years ago, and he went to 12 points a game and 49% last season. So, he transfers to Cal. They obviously have Chandler Hutchinson, who arguably is the best player in the conference, but, for me, they have a few too many question marks. I know they have some breakout guys on this roster, possibilities, but, what's your take on the Broncos?
Yeah, I think that the loss of Paris Austin's huge, and that definitely caught a number of people by surprise. He's going to head to Cal, so that's probably greener pastures for him and gets to play in a power conference. But it's too bad for Leon Rice and the Broncos because he was just starting to blossom into the player that they had originally expected. I think he was the second highest recruit that Leon Rice has ever gathered, and that's next to Chandler Hutchinson. So you'd have 2 4-star guys in the lineup for upperclassmen seasons. That's hard to beat. So a lot of it will fall on Lexus Williams, a transfer from Valparaiso. And I've heard generally good things about him. He's no Paris Austin, though, just from an overall skill set, and they'll have to change some things around. But I think that one of the additions that's really kind of going under the radar for Boise is the addition of Christian Sangfelder from Fordham. And he's averaging, I think, somewhere around 13, 14 points per game over at Fordham, and he had double digits from his freshman year all the way to his junior year. And he'll slot right in where Nick Duncan used to play. And I think that's a more efficient option on offense. It might not be nearly as entertaining as Nick Duncan. I'm obviously a huge fan of what he brought to Boise, but Sangfelder's a great option at number 4, and they have big guys underneath. So Boise could sneak up on some teams. I don't know if they're quite on the level as Nevada, but they've got a really solid squad.
Yeah, I agree. I think this all comes down to, can their grad transfers make an impact? And somebody's going to have to step up, whether it be, Zach Haney, David Wacker, maybe Jessup. Talk about Jessup a little bit. Do you think this kid's going to make a little bit of a push this year to put up more numbers?
I think he's going to have to be with Paris Austin leaving. And I think he's capable of doing that. I'm fairly confident in people thinking that he exceeded expectations his freshman year. I don't think he was expected to do nearly as much as what he did. He's probably their number 1 option from deep, from 3-point range. Obviously, with Chandler Hutchinson, those are 2 really good scorers. But you lose Austin. If you can have Jessup step up a little bit in that number 2 spot, I think Boise State will be in a good position.
That's one thing I wanted to ask you about is shooting. Does this team have enough shooting? They were 34% as a team last year from outside the arc. Do you think this team has enough shooters?
I think they'll probably be okay. You won't have a guy like Nick Duncan who's just going to fire him up 5, 10 threes a game. But maybe that will work out better for them. And the Leon Rice philosophy is you either shoot threes or you try to get baskets near the lane. So as long as they have a perimeter threat, and they definitely have one at Jessup, Hutchinson's perimeter game is developing, and it'll continue to do so, especially if he wants to be a future NBA player. So I think they'll be fine in terms of in and out, and they might not be nearly as efficient on offense this year, and that would probably be because Lexus Williams, he might not be nearly as good as a floor leader as Paris Austin was, but I think offensively they should be fine.
Yeah, I think Lexus Williams will be good enough. He's obviously, like you said, not Paris Austin, but I think he's formidable. He'll be fine. Another one kid before we move on, I wanted to ask you about is Derek Alston, 6'8" kid. You think he redshirted last year? Do you think he makes any impact on this team?
He should. I think he'll probably get a few more looks, and that's just because of some of the departures this year. I think that when you lose Austin, you lose Duncan. Those are two solid outlets that you have to make up for. But in terms of down low, you have the triple duo, I guess, of Wacker and George and Haney. So those bodies are pretty much cemented at the number 5 position. So I think you'll probably see a minimal game out of Derek Austin, but I think Alex Hobbs might be a better option if you're looking for some underclassmen to make a better leap. He's a solid perimeter outlet for Boise State, so he can make an impact.
Yeah, they definitely have some nice size up front with Haney and Wacker. I think both those guys are 6'10" and above. Where do you have Boise in your preseason rankings? I have them at 5.
Yeah, I think that they'll probably finish in the top 4. I've been kind of debating between 3rd and 4th. I'll slot them at number 4 right now. But I think they'll be pretty good. I would probably guess that they finish in the NIT. I don't think they're NCAA tournament bound, but they should be able to go to the NIT.
All right. So up next tonight, we're going to talk about Colorado State. So the Rams are coming off a pretty successful season. You know, they did miss out on the NCAA tournament, just missed out on the Mountain West title. They got eked out by Nevada. But still, you know, they obviously have to replace 2 stars. You know, Gian Clavel, Emmanuel Amagbo. Both guys were all Mountain West. Really, really big program guys. You know, they're the big piece of the program the last few years. They do have one of the better backcourts in the conference. You know, Prentice Nixon and JD Page are really, really good. Solid defenders, both experienced, can score the basketball. It really starts with those 2 guys, in my opinion, Eli. But the guy everyone's raving about is Nico Carvacho. You know, he could be the breakout guy in the conference. I think he had 20 and 11 in their scrimmage the other day. You know, what's your take on Colorado State? You think they'll be okay without those 2 guys in Clavel and Magbo?
Yeah, Carvacho is definitely an X factor for them. I think Prentice Nixon, we already know that he's a solid player, but he wasn't a very efficient shooter last year and hasn't been yet. So he can put up 13 like he did last year, but he only shot, I think, around 37% from the floor. Yeah. And he'll see a lot more usage this season with Gian Clavel moving on, because he was their go-to guy last year. He could put in 20 if you needed him to. He just took over the conference tournament final against Nevada. So I think Prentice Nixon will probably be a more important player for Colorado State this year, because they can't rely on 2 players like they did last year in Amagbo and Clavel. They'll have more balanced scoring. They'll probably have more than 7 players playing in the game because they had that short rotation last year. So if Nixon can step up and Carvacho is better in the post, and a lot of people expect him to be, I think Colorado State will be all right.
Yeah, and then JD Page is a guy that, you know, he seemed to really come on late last season. He averaged 8.5. He's another guy that needs to be more efficient. I think he wasn't a very good shooter last year either. And then the guy I'm kind of intrigued by, and I know he missed a lot of last season due to, I think, academics, was Che Bob. He's a really versatile kid. He can kind of guard multiple spots. Do you think he plays a large role in this team?
Yeah, I think so. And he'll probably finish in double digits in scoring, because I think he'll see a larger role this year and more usage. And it's really big for him to return, because he was one of the 3 players that was suspended for the rest of the season in mid-January last year due to academics. So they get him back. Devocio Butler's, he transferred to Texas Southern, so that's a loss for Colorado State because they're expecting him to be on the short rotation. But if Shea Bob can step into the role, and he could probably be expected to start or at least come directly off the bench, if he can step up and be solid, then that'll definitely benefit the Rams, but they'll need him to produce as well.
Yeah, the thing I'm concerned about is, you know, last year they were one of the best rebounding teams in college basketball, you know, mainly because of Amagbo. Do you think Carvacho can keep that up? Do you think he's that good of a rebounder?
I think he's a solid rebounder, and we'll definitely see more of him this season in that sort of role now that Amagbo's left. I mean, but Amagbo is just a double-double machine. You could count on him for 10 rebounds every night. I'm pretty sure he finished as the all-time MWC double-double leader, so that's impressive. But it just means there's more you have to make up. So the initial signs are that Carvacho is going to be solid in the post, both on the boards and offensively. But he needs to step up, or CSU is going to find themselves in the bottom half of the conference.
Yeah, he did average 6 rebounds a game in only 20 minutes last year, so that's pretty productive. A couple newcomers they have, Dion James, he's a JUCO guy. They always love to go JUCO. Larry Eustace always, you know, goes the JUCO route. Raekwon Mitchell's another guy. And also they have Lorenzo Jenkins. I think he's an Arkansas transfer. Do you know anything about these three guys and if they can make an impact this year?
Yeah, Deion James is probably going to be the most relevant player of those newcomers. It's a big loss for them for losing Alonzo Tyson to, I think it's a season-ending foot injury. So he was primed to be a top 100 JUCO transfer for CSU, so that's going to hurt a little bit. But Deion James is solid. He's athletic. He'll probably start at the number 4. And he's no Emmanuel Mago right now, but you can't really expect anyone to be at this point. But he should make an immediate impact. And if you can get solid minutes out of Mitchell off the bench, I think that CSU will be in a good spot.
All right. And I have Colorado State in the number 6 spot. Where do you have them, Eli?
I have them 7th. I think that the loss of Gian Clavel is going to hurt both on and off the floor. He was the leader for this team, and it's just a lot of points you have to make up on a nightly basis.
Absolutely. And he wasn't just an offensive player. I think a lot of people thought that,
No.
but he was an excellent defender as well. So that's going to be tough to overcome, and we'll see if they can do that. All right, so I have them at 6. Eli has them at 7. Up next, we're going to talk about my favorite team, Fresno State. Let me just say, first of all, Rodney Terry, he's done a really good job getting talent, especially by the way of the transfer. Jerron Hopkins from Colorado, Ray Bowles from Pacific, just to name a few. This backcourt is really, really good, as we know. It's deep. Coach Terry has plenty of options to go to. I think it comes down to the front court, though. We've talked about this quite a bit this offseason. If Bryson Williams can step up, if they can get a little bit more production from Terrell Carter, they're probably going to be in that top 4. What's your thoughts on Fresno State?
Yeah, I think that Bryson Williams is probably in the same position that Nico Carvacho is in right now, and that's that the teams really need them to step up. They already have talented backcourts, and Fresno State probably has one of the best backcourts in all of the West Coast. They have 4 guys that will probably finish in double-digit scoring. The addition of Ray Bowles is huge for them, but will fall on Terrell Carter and Bryson Williams, what they can do. They can be solid on the post. And you have to make up for 3 front court losses, too. You had Colin Russo was a solid player for them. Karachi Edo was pretty much their only big body, and he was only 6'6". So those are 2 decent options you have to make up for. But I think that Bryson Williams will be pretty solid. He won't be the first-tier front court player for the MWC, but he should definitely be in the second tier.
Yeah, so I'm assuming we're going to see a lot of 4-guard lineups.
I would think so. Yeah, I think it's safer for Rodney Terry to do that just from an offensive outlook, and you have players like Jerron Hopkins who can probably guard about 4 positions as well.
Oh, absolutely. Hopkins is a really, really versatile kid. He kind of does it all. 13 points a game, 5.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists. Not a great shooter, but like you said, he plays great defense. He had 2.5 steals per game last season, and he can guard multiple spots. So having something like that is a big weapon. Talk about Ray Bowles a little bit, the transfer from Pacific. He seems like just a physical kid, physical guard. What do you think he does for this team this year?
I think he adds another element to the Fresno State offense, and he's just another body that Fresno State can insert and have him get 10, 12 points per game, and I think that's huge for Fresno State. So you already have 2 solid outside scorers in Jamel Taylor and Deshaun Taylor. If you can add Ray Bowles, who's a bit larger, he'll be more on the wing spot. If he can go and get buckets like I know he has, and he attacks the lane well and can finish in the paint, I think that's an added element to Fresno State with their already pretty well-known perimeter threats.
All right. So where do you have Fresno in the rankings preseason?
I've been debating between 3rd and 4th, and I'm just flipping between Boise State and Fresno State, so I'll probably pick them 4th if I have Boise State 3rd.
Okay, and I just want to ask you real quick. So if, say, Bryson Williams has a breakout year, he puts up, 13 and 7 or something like that, is that enough for this team to win the league?
It's going to be hard to overcome Nevada, but it all comes down to the front court for Fresno State, because I think you can count on their 4 aforementioned guards to really produce.
Right.
But if Bryson Williams is a guy that can step up and really assert himself in the front court, I think Fresno State's going to be really, really tough to stop, especially in the conference tournament where they've been pretty solid the last few years.
Yeah, I have them at 3. So I guess you would put them in that 3 or 4 spot as well. I just want to mention, too, that the Fresno State the players, fans, do not like Eli very much.
No, they don't. We'll see if they come around. And they had three or four players in the top 25 rankings. They weren't too pleased with where they were slotted, but yeah, we'll see what happens this season. Maybe they'll like me a little bit more come March.
All right. So up next, we're going to talk about New Mexico. So the Craig Neal era is over, in Albuquerque. His first year was really successful. Last three, pretty underwhelming. So Paul Weir comes in from New Mexico State, which I really thought was a great hire. I think he's already showing that, what type of coach he is. He's building through transfers. He's bringing in recruits. He's doing a really good job. But this year's roster just isn't very good. Sam Logwood is their leading returner. I think he averaged 7.5 last year. I don't think they're the worst team in the conference, but I would probably say they'll finish in that maybe 7 to 9 range. I just don't think they have enough to get up even near the middle of the pack. What's your thoughts on the Lobos? Yeah,
I agree with you. I don't think they're the worst team, but they're not that far off. And I think that New Mexico is better suited for the future. They already have 2 high major guys coming in next year in Jaquan Lyle and Vance Jackson. So those are 2 power conference transfers. But in terms of this year's team, you have Sam Logwood, who's a decent option. He'd probably be a solid number 3 if he were playing for another team.
Right.
And Tino Jackson's a solid transfer from Akron. I think he'll probably lead the team in scoring. But with that being said, you have a number of guys that will probably be a good option as number 3 and number 4 in other teams, but they're considered the number 1s or number 2s on this year's New Mexico roster. So I think as long as Paul Weir can find some diamonds in the rough and guys that will produce for years to come, I think you'd probably consider this a successful year for the Lobos, even though the expectations might not be super high.
Yeah, right. I mean, the future's bright. I mean, I really like Weir. He did a good job last year at New Mexico State. He's bringing in talent. It's just not there yet. And losing a guy like Elijah Brown, losing Tim Williams, that's a big hit.
Yeah, I think that we talk about what they have coming in, but we also talk about losing 2 guys that average about 35 points per game. And although Elijah Brown wasn't super efficient, he got about 20 points per game. So those are other 2 scored. What's that?
I'm sure they'd love him on this roster this year because they need anything
definitely.
they can get.
Yeah, definitely. And he's over in Oregon now, and he'll probably do just fine there. But in terms of this year's roster, you have some young guys there. You have some other players that will be solid in their roles. But I think that the Lobos are probably headed towards the bottom of the season.
Yeah, and they also lost Jordan Hunter to transfer, and Xavier Adams also transferred, correct?
Yeah, they had probably like 5 transfers, I think. So just up and down the roster, left and right, you have guys that are headed to other places. But I think Paul Weir is doing just fine of adding plenty of talented transfers. He added a 4-star last night, so the future is definitely looking bright for them.
Yeah, I don't think some Lobo fans understand how bad this roster is, just for some communication on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reality check for sure because New Mexico's been a solid team the last however many years, and it's just a new era for them. And although Craig Neal wasn't a great coach, he could usually get this team to around 17, 18, 19 wins. Right. And with Paul Weir, I mean, we expect him to be a good coach, but it's still a new job, and it's a tougher place to win. And the fans are passionate and loyal, and they want to see this team succeed. So just have to be patient and see what happens.
Now, before we move on, and the fans might get a little upset with me for even asking this, but is the Pit the same type of atmosphere it used to be maybe, a handful of years ago?
I mean, it can't be nearly as good as it was about 5-10 years ago when they're at its peak. But I think if the fans start seeing this team show some progress, and they looked pretty solid in their exhibition against BYU, it should generate some interest, and especially moving forward when they have some more talent on campus, it should be back to where it was.
Yeah, I think San Diego State has kind of taken over the best home court advantage in the conference, in just my opinion.
Yeah, I think so too. It's hard to beat Viejas. That's just such a difficult place to play.
Absolutely. So, Eli, where do you have New Mexico in your rankings? I put them at 9. I thought that was fair.
Yeah, I have them at 9 as well.
All right. So obviously we're going to talk about Nevada next, who I'm sure both of us agree is the favorite. They're coming off a really successful year, 28 wins, Mountain West tournament title, also a Mountain West regular season title. Eric Musselman, has really turned this program around. He's almost done it immediately. He's bringing in transfer after transfer. He's built one of the more talented rosters on the West Coast, and even in college basketball, I think you can make an argument. Looking at this year's group, okay, I think they're deeper. I think they're more versatile. You know, I think they're better equipped than last year's team. I know last year's team was really good, star heavy at the top. You know, do you agree with that? Because I really like this club a lot.
I'm glad you do, because it sounds like Eric Musselman isn't too thrilled right now. But yeah, there's a lot to like about this team, and they add the Martin twins, which is awesome. They both played at NC State, so that's a huge addition. I think Kendall Stevens from Purdue adds another perimeter outlet, and even if he isn't knocking down 2-3 triples a night, he still can be used as a decoy, which just allows your offense to spread out. I can't guarantee they'll be better this year, and I mean, a lot has to come into place, and the team Musselman isn't too thrilled about the team rebounding right now in defense, and that's definitely something that will be ironed out. I think those two things could come back to bite Nevada in the long term, but there's a lot of talent on the campus right now, and I think there's reason to be excited. And there's potential if they can pick up some quality wins, they could find themselves as maybe an 8-9 seed on Selection Sunday.
They're one of those teams that really plays positionless basketball, you know, which I really like. And I just think that the Martin twins bring so much versatility to this roster. And you also have to remember, you know, Elijah Foster comes back this year. You know, he missed most of last season. He averaged 12 and 7. So that gives them, you know, somebody up in the front court that can make a pretty considerable impact. Lindsey Drew is another kid that doesn't get enough credit. You know, he averaged 6 points, 5 rebounds, almost 5 assists a game. He's long. He can defend multiple positions. Talk about Drew a little bit. Are you a big fan of his?
Yeah, definitely. I think some people have been sleeping on him the last few years in terms of where he ranks among MWC point guards. But I think he's right up there with some of the best, because he's not relied upon to do much of the scoring, and he's not an awesome jump shooter, and no guys like to sag off on him. But he'll get his 5 assists, and he'll get his rebounds, and he'll probably steal a few passes. So he really does it all for Nevada, and if he's able to facilitate the offense, I think that's huge for the Wolfpack. And like you said, the added versatility of the Martin twins is great. And just playing positionless basketball, it allows players just to be versatile and guard multiple positions and be threats from both inside and outside. And you can look at the roster. It seems like almost every single player on the roster is 6'7". So you have guys that are 6'7" bringing the ball up or posting up. So it's really an entertaining and interesting form of how the game of basketball is being played.
Yeah, you know, we've talked about so many talented kids on this roster. We haven't even mentioned Jordan Caroline.
Yeah, he's a special one too. I think he's probably the main rival for Chandler Hutchison for Player of the Year.
Right.
You can make a case for maybe Kobe McEwen or Justin James, but Caroline's a freak, and he's got an NBA-ready body, and he's incredibly athletic. And now that Cameron Oliver's moved on, I think we'll see a little bit more high usage out of him, but special player.
Right. One guy, before we move on, Eli, I wanted to ask you about as well is Josh Hall. I definitely think he'll see a extended role with this team this year. What does he bring to this team, and what do you like about this kid?
Yeah, he's coming off a bit of a shaky season. He had to battle some injuries, so that's a bit difficult. But he was pretty much their number 6 guy off in the overall rotation, because he was the first guy off the bench last year. And I think he's probably going to be expected to do a bit more now that Marcus Marshall has moved on. So he'll be pretty big in that wing position, and he'll be expected to add a few points to the offense for sure.
All right. Do you think this team is deeper than last year's club? I do.
I think that they're deeper. They're not as star-oriented, but I think it'll definitely benefit Musselman and the group that they won't have to play only 6 guys every night.
Yeah.
And as well-trained and as good as their stamina is, it's just it'll be comforting for Musselman knowing that he can dig 3-4 guys into his bench and help spell guys like Caroline or Cody Martin or Lindsey Drew from time to time.
Are you happy with their non-conference schedule?
I mean, it's all right. It hasn't been great the last 2 years, and I think just overall, all the MWC coaches right now are just finding a bit of an issue of scheduling quality games. And like I've been saying it all summer long that if you can add whoever you want, but if you don't have quality opponents on your roster, you're probably not going to be expected to pick up a bid on Selection Sunday. And I think that Nevada's got a very slim margin of error. I posted an article this morning on how many chances each team has to pick up victories from each column on the team sheet, and Nevada only has 2 column 1 chances. So
Wow.
that's tough. I mean, that's what the selection committee looks at, and if you only have 1 win or 2 wins against some of the nation's best teams, I don't know if that's enough to push the needle and put your team in the tournament.
Yeah, I got to say, as excited as I am about this club, when I saw their non-conference, I was a little disappointed. I mean, there is some solid, pieces, teams, but not as much as I expected. So obviously we both have them at number 1, correct?
Yeah, we do. And just one more note, I think that TCU game will be big. That's a neutral court game. I believe it's in Staples Center. And then they also have the home and home with Rhode Island. That's the first Monday of the year. So you have to win at least one of those games if you want to even come close to an at-large bid. So if they go 0-2 in those, they'll probably have to win the conference tournament to punch a bid.
Texas Tech is also on this schedule, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so that's another opportunity, because I think Texas Tech could be pretty good this year. All right. So here we go. Now, obviously, San Diego State up next. Pretty disappointing last year. 19 wins. They got into the NIT, but San Diego State's a program where they want to be in the NCAA tournament. Every year. We obviously have to start with the retirement of Steve Fisher. Every time I talk about Steve Fisher, I say one thing. Okay, I say when he got there, he had to give away tickets to students. When he left, they had the best home court advantage in the conference. He just did a tremendous job. Talk about, before we get into teams, talk about what Steve Fisher's done at San Diego State.
I mean, he pretty much put Aztec basketball on the map. San Diego State really wasn't known for its basketball prior to Steve Fisher being there, and he just produced and brought a number of tournament bids to SDSU. They picked up a number 2 seed, if you can even believe that, from a Mountain West team right now. It seems like so long ago, but yeah, San Diego State won 30 games just a handful of seasons ago, and Steve Fisher just made this team a consensus top 25 team most years. He brought in some awesome recruits, sent guys to the NBA. Kawhi Leonard right now, former SDSU player, is considered one of the best players in the NBA right now. He was a product of Steve Fisher's recruiting. So, I mean, the shoes that Brian Dutcher has to fill right now, they couldn't be bigger.
No, and everybody's, the San Diego State fans will tell me, well, Brian Dutcher was, Steve Fisher's right-hand man for so many years. He was, and it could go smoothly and everything could be great, but also he's not Steve Fisher. So people just have to remember that. So let's look at this year's team. Now roster-wise, I think they're in pretty good shape. They struggled on offense again last year. It's been a problem. But they bring in Devin Watson, which is huge. He was a 20-point per game scorer at San Francisco. He's a really good player. Hopefully they can figure things out on that end of the floor. I also have to mention, though, they were your typical – were they as good on defense as they usually are last season, in your opinion?
No, they weren't, and even the statistics show it. So I think they finished in the 40s in overall defensive efficiency, according to KenPom. And I think each of the previous 4 years they were in the top 15. And the other thing, even though they're in the top 15, I think their defensive efficiency has actually declined each of the last 4 seasons. So I don't know if Dutcher has the juice to figure it out on defense, but I mean, they're going to have to, because San Diego State is almost notorious for winning those low 60s games. And even if they are solid on defense, if they don't have the offense to match, that's what we saw last year. They weren't able to win some of those mid-60s games.
Right, and I'll say this too. 2 guys that you have to look at that will probably, be much. Let me just say, Dakari Allen was a really good defender, and he's gone. And then a Mountain West coach told me that Zylan Cheatham is going to be a bigger loss than some people might think.
I think he's flying on the radar too, and he's another guy that transferred to a Pac-12 school along with Elijah Brown and Paris Austin. So. He's a big loss, and Dakari Allen he won Defensive Player of the Year last year, and he's just an excellent defender that could guard multiple positions. So even though you add a guy like Devin Watson who can get you 28 a night, and I don't necessarily expect him to do that just with how the SDSU offense runs, but you can't discount the losses of Cheatham and Dakari Allen because those are quality players.
And Malik Pope is going to break out this year, right, Eli?
I mean, SDSU fans will probably tell you that. I think what benefits Pope this season is he has surrounding options with him, and he has Cameron Rooks, who's a 7-footer from Cal, so that's a nice addition. And then Jalen McDaniels is a redshirt freshman who's a former 4-star who will also get some looks. So at the very least, Pope won't be relied upon to be the guy down low. and he'll have at least 2 solid options next to him.
Yeah. Let's talk about the backcourt real quick. Obviously, Jeremy Helmsley's a really, really good player. I like him a lot. Trey Kell is a kid. He's had somewhat of an up and down career. He averaged 13 points a game last year, but only shot 26% from long range. What's your overall take on Kell? Are you a fan of his?
I like him. I think that both those guys need to add some consistency, though, because they can score 20 points if they want to, or they can go 1 of 12 from the field, and we've seen both instances the last 2 seasons. But if those two are working together and they're producing on a nightly basis, along with Devin Watson, you also have Matt Mitchell, who's a solid freshman, and Jordan Shackle. Those guys are all decent shooters. You can't expect all of them to be great on the same night, but if they can produce and be solid for 75% of SDSU games, I think that'll be good for the Aztecs. But we know how talented Hemsley and Kell are, but just how consistent they are is what's more important right now.
And if they can get anything from Gil Caesar, would be a plus because he was just so disappointing last year. I thought he would come in and average close to double figures, and he was pretty much non-existent. I think you agree with me.
Yeah, definitely. And he, if I remember correctly, was at least a 4-star recruit. He might have actually been a fringe 5-star by some databases, and he really hasn't produced much of anything. And I don't know how large his role will be this year. And SDSU obviously added a lot of players both in the backcourt and front court, so he probably won't be relied upon a ton. But if he can come off the bench and produce a little bit, at least more than what he has the last few seasons, that'll be great. But like you said, it's just inconsistent, and there just hasn't been much there for Gil Caesar.
Yeah. Well, I do like the addition of Cam Brooks. I know you mentioned him. I think they give this team much needed size up front. If he can stay out of foul trouble, he's not going to give you a ton of production, but he definitely can, play good defense and be a presence down low for this team. Where do you see them in the conference standings? I put them at 2. I can probably see them anywhere in that 2 to 4 range. Where do you have them?
Yeah, I have them at 2nd as well. I'm still a bit hesitant, though, because Fresno State and Boise State has a bit more in terms of coaching and experience and cohesiveness. But with the addition of Devin Watson, you also have 2 post guys that can help out with Malik Pope. I think that they're probably a near consensus number 2 pick for the MWC this year.
Yeah, I agree. If things break right, this team is good enough to win the conference, in my opinion. And can I just announce something real quick? I don't know if you saw it, Eli, but Western Kentucky transfer Jordan Branger's just committed to Colorado State.
Really? Just right now, huh?
Just right now. I got about 3 different direct messages about it.
Well, there we go. There's another transfer you can add up to the MWC list, so that's good.
Okay, so San Diego State should have a pretty good season if things break right. So San Jose State is next. So I'll say this. At the beginning of the offseason, I was kind of excited about this team. I think we both were. I thought they could maybe creep up the standings a little bit, but then they lose Brandon Clark to Gonzaga, and then they lose their head coach. So now it looks like they're most likely going to struggle. They bring in Gene Prelou, I think that's how you say it, from Colorado. And now they're just kind of a mystery. What's your take on San Jose State?
Yeah, it's too bad because I actually had San Jose State pegged ahead of Colorado State and ahead of UNLV and some other teams. I had them finishing the top half of the conference in late March because I really felt that Wojcik was finally getting his guys together. He had the players he wanted on campus. You could start to see some improvements from San Jose State last year. They beat New Mexico and San Diego State and UNLV, who have just dominated the conference the last 5-10 years. So it really seemed like the program was headed in the right direction. And then Dave Wojcik resigned in July. I think it was July 10th or something like that.
Yeah.
And it sent the whole program in a bit of a tailspin because not only do you have to reset from a head coaching perspective, which is difficult, and especially with the head coaching search that lasted 3-4 weeks, something like that. But then you lose Brandon Clark, and he was probably the consensus pick to win Player of the Year this season. He's just an excellent player, and I think I don't want to hot take it, but I think Brandon Clark might win a WCC Player of the Year award in one of the next 2 seasons. He's so talented, and with a year to be under Mark Few, he's going to be awesome. But yeah, I think San Jose State just had a crazy offseason. They also lost Terrell Brown, who got arrested and kicked off the team. So it was looking so promising for the Spartans, and now they're just right back to square one where they were the last few seasons.
Yeah, I was looking at their roster. Ryan Waylidge is a pretty good player, averaged 13 and 4 last year. Really good 3-point shooter. Jalen James is solid, but he's not a very good shooter. And then, I see J.C. Hillsman, Isaiah Nichols, but, all those guys are pretty much, medium role players. So that's really all he's working with right now.
Yeah, he's not working with a lot. I do like Prelo, though. I think he's got some good philosophies. I think he's going to, in time, take this program to where it needs to be. And all that really is right now is competitiveness.
Right.
But you can't expect much out of this team for the next 2-3 years because they just don't have much talent on campus. And in an area like San Jose, all the quality players will go to UCLA or Stanford or across the country. So, yeah, Prelo just doesn't have much to work with right now.
Yeah, they're lucky Air Force is so bad because if they weren't, I'd have them in the bottom spot because I have them at 10. I have them at 10.
I have them there as well, and it's too bad because I was looking forward to see what SGSU had in store for this season once the snowball really got rolling, but that's just how it is.
Yeah, we talked about it a few months ago. We were pretty excited, and it just kind of went downhill, unfortunately. So, all right, UNLV is up next. People are getting excited. I'll say that about UNLV basketball again, especially with this year's recruiting class. Brandon McCoy, 5-star kid, people are really high on. I think he was a top 20 guy. Obviously 5-star, 6'11". I think he's 250 pounds. So he's going to be a force inside. They have a long list of newcomers. Jordan Johnson, point guard from UW Milwaukee. He's a really good player. Javon Mooring is back. He's good. So definitely an exciting team. I'm not ready to put this team in the top, say, 2 or 3 like some. They're really young. Chemistry could be an issue with all the newcomers, but they're certainly headed in the right direction. They'll be improved. I'd probably put them in that 4 to 6 range. What's your overall take on the Rebels?
Yeah, they could be top 3, top 4 team. That's not where I believe they'll be slotted, but it's a program that's coming off its worst season ever. They went 11-21 last year, I believe, and they didn't look competent at times. And it's tough for a guy like Marvin Menzies to see because he was so successful at New Mexico State. He got to 5 NCAA tournaments at what's considered a one-bid league almost all season. So, yeah, UNLV is definitely taking a step in the right direction with these additions. I think that I wasn't too high on Brandon McCoy from the beginning, but he did great at the U19 games. He was really efficient, and I don't think he'll do a ton in the scoring category. He might score maybe 10 points a game or so, but he'll be a good anchor for them down low.
Okay. Can you give us any background on their other newcomers? I know Amari Hardy's a guy that's coming in and a couple of JUCO guys. What type of impact do you think these guys make?
I think I saw Shakir Houston was on the athletic all-conference team, but he could be one of the best rebounders, not in just the MWC, but in the entire country. He just has a knack for rebounding, and he'll probably put up a number of double-doubles just because of how good he is on the glass. So he'll be a guy to watch out for. He's definitely fun to watch. Amari Hardy will be solid at the point guard position. So it really is a good class. I don't think that Czech Dion will produce a ton and probably won't be expected to do that much just with Brandon McCoy and other guys down there. But, yeah, keep an eye out for Shakir Houston because he's a solid player. And, they really have a number of good incomers that will do a number of good things for this year's team.
Yeah, I just think this team needs time to gel, obviously, too. They're really young. So definitely they'll improve. I can see them creeping up into the middle of the pack, maybe in 4th or 3rd. If things break right, they could finish that high. So definitely exciting times for UNLV. It's nice to see them relevant because college basketball is really better when UNLV is in the mix. So, all right, I have them at I think I said I have them at 6 or 7. Where do you have them, Eli?
I have them 6th right now. I think that the potential is for them to finish higher, and you always have to give them a shot at the conference tournament down in Las Vegas at their home court. So I think best case scenario for the Rebels is they stay around 500, maybe a little bit better in conference play, and give them their all at the conference tournament.
All right. Utah State up next. Aggies coming off another subpar year. To break it down fairly easy, they have a really good backcourt with Kobe McEwen and Sam Merrill, but outside that, it's pretty thin. Especially after their big man this offseason, Norbert Janicek. I think he went down with a knee injury, correct?
Yeah, he did. And
Yeah.
I think people are discounting that loss because it was already a thin front court for the Aggies, and Janacek was supposed to be their anchor down low, and now he'll miss the entire season. And you really don't have many big bodies. I mean, you think of teams like Air Force doesn't have many guys they're very big, but Utah State's right there, and they have a couple guys that are 6'9", some that are 6'7", but overall, not a ton of size or length down low.
Yeah, I really like the backcourt. I mean, Kobe McEwen is excellent. I think Sam Merrill is one of the better, guards. Excellent ball security guy, can score, very efficient. I like him a lot, but there's just not much to go on outside those two guys. I think Quinn Taylor's a kid who's going to have to see more minutes up front. Alexis Dargetton as well, but I just don't see enough to consider them, a factor in the conference outside of the two guys in the backcourt.
Yeah, I'm not too sold on what Tim Duryea has done yet in Logan, and he had Jalen Moore, who was just a fantastic player, and Shane Rector as well, and he really didn't accomplish much of anything with those two guys, and those are excellent players. So, I mean, you lose those two guys over the course of the offseason, and though you still have McEwen on campus, and he's a solid player, he'll probably finish on the first team. Sam Merrill's a great shooter. I think that the guy to look out for is D'Angelo Isby. He's a JUCO transfer, and he put up 27 in their scrimmage the other night, so he can definitely get after and score the basketball. But the front court is a huge question mark, and just knowing what this team has accomplished in the past with better players, I mean, it hasn't been that much. So, yeah, I don't really expect a ton out of Utah State.
Yeah, I would have felt better if Janacek didn't get injured because I think he could have been a pretty solid player for them. But I have them at 8. Where do you have them, Eli?
I have them at, let's see, if I had New Mexico number 9, I had them number 8 as well.
All right. So the final team we're going to talk about tonight is Wyoming. I think it's a team both of us are really excited about. Alan Edwards did a really good job in year 1. He won 23 games, which was 8 wins. I think they won 14 the year before, so they won 9+ games from the last year of the former coach. I like this group a lot. They bring back pretty much every impact guy except for, I think, Jason McAnum. I think that's how you say it. He averaged 12 points a game. They have Justin James, who's a Mountain West Player of the Year candidate. Hayden Dalton is one of the better bigs in the league. Really talented kid. Alan Herndon is back. So I think this team is at least a top 4, maybe 5 team in the conference. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that this team is one that's really going to sneak up on some this year because I don't think that they really got enough credit at media days in the course of the preseason. I think that their front court's awesome, and it's really underrated. Hayden Dalton, we saw him play against USC and just went off and could just hit 3 after 3 after 3. And Alan Herndon will get his zone. So, and then you combine that with your star in Justin James, and he could be a first-team All-MWC player this year. He'll score around 20 points per game. And just, I think one of the biggest benefits for Wyoming is it's such a difficult place to play. At elevation, Wyoming loves to run. They, I think, finished in the top 15 in tempo last year. And if they can shoot, which they have done in the past, I think that the Cowboys will be next to impossible to beat at home.
Yeah, I think guys like Lewis Adams, Alex Gorski, they're going to have to, see bigger roles in the backcourt. But if they do and they play well, I think Wyoming's going to have a really successful season. I could see them finishing as high as maybe 3rd.
I think so too. I think they're a really sneaky team, and that's why I have them. I don't want to spoil it for the other people that will see it, but they will eventually. I think that they'll finish around the middle of the pack, maybe around 4th or 5th in conference play. And I think they might make a run for it in the conference tournament like they did just a few years ago with Larry Nance and Josh Adams and those guys, because I like that they have their star and then they have a nice supporting cast around it, and not a lot of MWC teams have that this year.
Absolutely. That front court, with Herndon and Dalton is really good, and Justin James could be a, close to 20-point scorer this year. So I have them at 4. Where do you have them, Eli?
I have them at 5th.
All right, that's pretty fair. So excited about the Cowboys, really. I think they might be the sleeper team of the conference. So, all right, that's it for the team-by-team breakdowns. We're going to get out of here in just a second, but I wanted to get Eli's picks for this season. So, Eli, before we get out of here, who's your player of the year pick in the Mountain West?
I'm going with Chandler Hutchison. I don't think that one took a ton of debate for me. I think Jordan Caroline might make a run for it, but I'm pretty safe with Hutchison after returning from the NBA draft pool that he'll come back and explode again.
I agree. I'm going to go Hutchin as well, and I would probably say the same thing. I think Caroline will be in that mix as well. But again, a guy like James, maybe even Devin Watson, will be in that mix. Who's your coach of the year?
I debated on this one back and forth, but I think that Alan Edwards is going to take it home from Wyoming. I think that he did really well in his first season winning the CBI. That was really impressive, and the last team to do that was Nevada, win the CBI and go straight to the NCAA tournament the next year. So if Alan Edwards can punch a ticket to the NCAA tournament, I think it'll probably be pretty safe to say that he'll win Coach of the Year this year.
I completely agree with you. I think it'll be Edwards, but I think you also have to put Marvin Menzies in the mix as well. If UNLV makes a big jump this year, and maybe could get into that 4 or 5 spot, because that would be a huge jump from finishing last. And obviously, who is your newcomer this year? I think this one's pretty easy.
Yeah, if we're talking just freshmen, I think it'll definitely be Brandon McCoy. He's the top recruit, the 5-star player, and he's already competed with some of the best players from his age and excelled at that level. And he'll get his chance to shine in Vegas this year, and I think he'll do just that.
And both of us have Nevada as the champion, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So that'll do it for tonight's podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Eli, thanks so much for joining. Again, you can catch Eli on mountainwestwire.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We'll have some new changes by the end of the week, so stay tuned for that. But for the time being, you can check us out right there.
Also, follow his blog, heatcheckcbb.com. Also, you can follow him on Twitter at Boettger_Eli. So, Eli, thanks so much for joining. My name is Tony Patelis. This is the College Hoop News Podcast, and we'll talk to you later.